My name is Evelyn Hart. I was 32 years old the day I almost married Daniel Mercer. I say almost because 3 minutes before I was supposed to walk down the aisle, a little girl I had never seen before grabbed my hand with both of hers and asked me why I was marrying her daddy. She was crying so hard she could barely breathe. She wore a white cardigan over a pale yellow dress, the kind of dress someone picks for a child when they want her to look sweet and quiet. Her hair had come loose from one side of a ribbon, her cheeks were red, one of her shoes was untied. I remember all of that because I did not scream. I looked down at her hands first. Small hands, cold fingers, trembling. Then I looked at Daniel. He had been standing near the front of the chapel, waiting for the music to change. He was in his black suit with the ivory rose on his lapel, the same rose pinned to every groomsman. He had looked nervous all morning, but I had told myself that was normal. Grooms were allowed to be nervous. But when he saw the girl holding my hand, Daniel did not look nervous. He went pale. Not startled, not confused, not concerned. Pale, like the blood had been taken out of him all at once. The chapel went strangely still, not silent exactly. There were still whispers, a cough somewhere near the back, the soft creak of someone shifting in a wooden pew, but the air changed. People knew something had happened before they understood what it was. I was wearing my mother's pearl hairpin that day. It was tucked into the left side of my hair, just above the veil. I remember the tiny pull of it against my scalp as I lowered myself carefully to the little girl's height. I asked, "What's your name?" She swallowed, her bottom lip shook. "Lily," she said. I waited. She wiped her nose with the back of her hand and said, "Lily Mercer." I heard someone behind me inhale sharply. Daniel took one step forward. "Evelyn," he said. "Only my names. Not who is this, not are you okay, not Lily, what are you doing here? Just my name spoken like a warning." The little girl tightened her grip on my fingers. Her eyes moved past me toward the front row. That was where Marissa Vale was sitting. Marissa had been introduced to me as an old family friend. Daniel said she had helped after Claire died. Claire was his first wife, the wife he rarely talked about, the wife whose name always made him go quiet. Marissa looked beautiful that morning, polished, composed. She wore a silver-grey dress and a small hat with a veil that covered part of her face. She was sitting in the front row like she belonged there more than I did. And when Lily saw her, the child's whole body stiffened. Then Lily lifted one shaky hand, pointed straight at Marissa and said, "That's my mommy." Marissa stood up before anyone asked her anything. Too quickly. That was the first thing I noticed. Daniel's father, Richard, also moved, not toward the crying child, not toward me, toward Daniel like men do when they are trying to protect a story before it breaks open. Daniel forced a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Evelyn," he said again, softer this time, "don't do this here." I looked at him. I looked at Lily. Then I looked back at Marissa, who was staring at the little girl with a face so controlled it looked almost empty. Lily leaned closer to me and whispered, "She told me not to tell." That was the moment I understood that whatever was happening was not a misunderstanding. It was not a child wandering into the wrong wedding. It was not grief. It was not confusion. It was a secret with adults standing guard around it. And I was standing there in a wedding dress, holding the hand of a little girl who had somehow found me before I became legally tied to the man. Everyone suddenly wanted me not to question. So before I tell you what happened next, please hit like and subscribe. Listen closely, because the worst part of that day was not that Daniel had a child he never told me about. It was not even that this little girl pointed at another woman in the front row and called her mommy. The worst part was how fast everyone around her tried to make her quiet. Now let me take you back. To understand why I didn't scream, you have to understand what Daniel had taught me to excuse. When I met Daniel Mercer, he did not seem like a man with secrets. He seemed tired. There is a difference, or at least I thought there was. I had been a hospice nurse for almost 9 years by then, mostly in memory care and end-of-life support. That kind of work changes the way you listen to people. You learn when someone is avoiding a subject because they are dishonest, and when they are avoiding it because touching the memory still hurts. At least you think you learn. Daniel came into my life quietly. No dramatic first meeting, no grand gesture. We met in the lobby of a rehabilitation center where his father had been recovering after minor heart surgery. I was there helping discharge a patient whose daughter had forgotten half the paperwork and all of her patients. Daniel noticed before anyone else did that I had dropped a folder. He picked it up, handed it to me and said, "You look like someone who has been holding the whole room together." It was not a line that should have stayed with me. But it did. Maybe because I was tired that day. Maybe because people often thanked doctors and ignored nurses. Maybe because Daniel had a way of looking at you like he was listening even before you spoke. He asked my name, I told him. He told me his. Then his father called him from across the lobby, and Daniel smiled apologetically, like even being needed was something he was sorry for. That was what I noticed first. How carefully he moved around other people's emotions. Later, I would understand that careful men can still be careless with the truth. But back then I saw gentleness. A week after that, he sent a thank you note to the nursing desk with a box of individually wrapped lemon cookies, because he remembered one of the older nurses mentioning she liked them. It was a small thing, practical, thoughtful. My life had always been made up of small things. Medication schedules, clean sheets, insurance forms, plastic cups of water with bent straws. The little blue folder families never read until they had to sign something. I trusted small things more than big declarations. Daniel seemed to understand that. Our first coffee was during my lunch break, 28 minutes long because I had to be back for a care conference at 2. He did not complain. He did not push for dinner. He sat across from me in the hospital cafe and asked what kind of music my mother used to play on Sundays. That surprised me. Most men asked what I did for fun. Daniel asked questions that made a person feel remembered. So I told him my mother liked old gospel records and black coffee. I told him she died when I was 17. I did not tell him everything, not then. He told me he had been married before. He said her name was Claire. The way he said it made me careful. Not curious, careful. She passed, I asked. He nodded. I'm sorry, I said. He looked down into his coffee and said, it was complicated. That was the first locked door. I saw it. I chose not to knock. I learned later that some people use grief like a locked room. They do not invite you in, they only let you stand outside long enough to feel sorry for asking. At the time, I thought Daniel was protecting something tender. So when he said Claire's death was complicated, I nodded. I let the silence sit between us. I stirred my coffee even though I had not added sugar. My mother used to say people tell the truth when they can survive hearing it out loud, I said. Daniel looked up at me then. There was something soft in his face, or maybe I wanted there to be. She sounds wise, he said. She was tired, I answered. That made him smile a little, not because it was funny, but because he seemed to understand the difference. My mother had been both, wise and tired, by the end more tired than anything. She raised me in a small duplex with a kitchen window that stuck in the summer and whistled in the winter. She kept receipts in envelopes marked by month. She paid bills on Fridays. She put rubber bands around old warranties and appliance manuals, as if order could hold a life together if love could not. The last week she was alive, she gave me a small pearl hairpin wrapped in tissue paper. It was not expensive. One pearl was slightly uneven. The clasp had been repaired twice, but she held it like it mattered. I wore this the day I left your father, she told me. Not the day she married him. The day she left. I remember sitting beside her bed, trying not to look scared. The hospice nurse had just adjusted her oxygen tubing. There was a glass of water on the nightstand with a lipstick mark on the rim, though she had not worn lipstick in months. She pressed the hairpin into my palm. Wear this when you need to remember who you are, she said. I did not understand the full weight of it then. 17-year-olds think survival is something that ends. You get through the funeral, you graduate, you move apartments, you buy your own towels. You think that means you made it. But some lessons keep opening. Daniel listened when I told him pieces of that, Not all of it, just enough. He never interrupted. He folded his hands around his paper coffee cup and watched me with a kind of quiet attention that felt rare. You hold a lot, he said. I shrugged because I did not like being seen too directly. So do most people. No, he said, not like you. I should have been more careful with how much that meant to me. Loneliness does not always feel like needing someone. Sometimes it feels like relief when someone notices you are tired before you say it. After that first coffee, Daniel became part of the edges of my week, a text after a difficult shift, a sandwich left at the nurse's station when I worked a double, a reminder to eat dinner that somehow did not feel controlling yet. He learned my schedule. Mondays were care conferences, Wednesdays were medication reconciliation days, Fridays were when I called families who had gone quiet because they were afraid of bad news. Daniel did not romanticize my work. He never called me an angel. I appreciated that. Angels did not fill out incident reports or argue with pharmacies about missing morphine orders. Once, after a patient died near dawn, I sat in my car in the parking garage for 20 minutes with the heater running and my hands still smelling faintly of lavender lotion. Daniel called before I drove home. I did not cry. I just said he waited until his daughter stepped out to get coffee. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, that happens more often than people think. Maybe he didn't want her to watch. I closed my eyes, maybe. He did not try to fix it. He stayed on the phone while I breathed. Back then that felt like kindness. That was how trust grew between us, not in one big moment, in small practical acts. Coffee, messages, a hand at the small of my back in crowded rooms, remembered details. And also in what he did not say. Clea remained a shape behind frosted glass. Sometimes I would ask a small question, not pushing, just trying to understand the man I was letting into my life. What was she like? Daniel would look away and say, bright. Then nothing else. Were you married long? Long enough. Do you still talk to her family? His jaw tightened almost too slightly to notice. Not really. I told myself grief did that. It narrowed people. It made ordinary questions feel like fingers pressed against a bruise. The first time he took me to dinner with his father, Richard, I understood where some of Daniel's silence came from. Richard Mercer was polished in a way that made warmth feel scheduled. He stood when I arrived. He complimented my dress. He asked about my work with an expression that said he already knew how much respect to assign it. Hospice, he said, unfolding his napkin across his lap. That must require a very steady temperament. It requires comfortable shoes, I said. Daniel smiled. Richard did not really. He studied me over his water glass and said, Daniel has always needed calm around him. I remember that sentence because it sounded like a compliment until I drove home and heard it again in my head. Needed calm. Not deserved love, not found happiness. Needed calm. Daniel reached for my hand under the table that night after Richard began talking about property assessments and hospital donors. His fingers were warm. His thumb moved once over my knuckle. When the server brought the check, Richard paid before anyone could offer. He slid his card into the folder without looking at the total. Then he said this wedding, when it happens, should be simple, clean, no unnecessary complications. Daniel looked down at his plate. We were not engaged yet. I remember smiling politely, because that is what women are taught to do when a conversation steps too far into their life and pretends it belongs there. On the drive home, Daniel apologized. My father can be intense. He seems protective. Daniel laughed under his breath. That's one word. Then he went quiet. I let him. A month later, I met Marissa Vale. She came to Daniel's house carrying a white bakery box tied with string. She had dark hair cut neatly at her shoulders and a face that seemed designed not to reveal inconvenience. Daniel introduced her while reaching for the box. Marissa helped a lot after Clea, he said. Not after Clea died, just after Clea. Marissa kissed his cheek, then she turned to me. So you're Evelyn, she said. The words were pleasant. The pause before my name was not. It's nice to meet you, I said. You too, Daniel told me you're very grounding. Grounding. Calm. Steady. By then I had started to notice how often people described me by what I provided. Marissa looked around Daniel's kitchen as if checking whether anything had been moved. Her eyes passed over the mail on the counter, the sink, the framed black and white photograph of Daniel and Claire near the hallway. I had seen that photograph before. Claire had been laughing in it. Daniel was looking at her instead of the camera. Marissa noticed me noticing. Some memories are hard to put away, she said. I nodded. They shouldn't have to be. Her smile stayed in place. No, she said, of course not. Daniel changed the subject immediately. He opened the bakery box and said Marissa had brought almond cake from the place Claire used to love. The kitchen smelled like sugar and coffee. Rain tapped lightly against the window over the sink. It should have felt domestic, almost peaceful. But Marissa moved through that kitchen too comfortably. She knew where the plates were. She knew which drawer stuck. She corrected Daniel when he reached for the wrong knife. No, not that one, she said gently. Claire hated that one. Daniel froze for half a second. Then he laughed. Right, I forgot. But he had not forgotten. I saw it in his face. He had simply been corrected in front of me. That night before I left, Daniel walked me to my car. The rain had stopped and the pavement shone under the porch light. I'm sorry if that was strange, he said. It wasn't strange. It was, but not in a way I could name. Marissa means well, he said. She was there during a very hard time. I understand. He looked relieved too quickly. Then he touched my cheek and said, You make everything feel quiet again. At the time I took that as love. I did not yet understand that quiet can be something people cherish. And it can also be something they demand. When Daniel proposed 6 months later, it was not dramatic. He asked in my apartment after dinner, while rain moved softly against the windows and my work shoes sat by the door. I was wearing an old sweater. There were dishes in the sink. A patient's family had sent me a thank you card that was still sitting unopened on the counter because I knew it would make me cry. Daniel said, I don't want a loud life, I want this you piece. The ring was simple, elegant, a little too perfect for someone who claimed he had picked it nervously. I said yes. And when I called Richard the next day because Daniel handed me the phone with a hopeful expression, his father said, Good. This will be a clean start for all of us. All of us. I remember standing in my kitchen with one hand resting on the counter, looking at the little pearl hairpin in the dish beside my mother's photograph. I had not worn it in years. But that night I picked it up and held it between my fingers. Wear this when you need to remember who you are. I thought I would wear it at my wedding because I was finally building something safe. I did not know yet that Daniel's idea of safety required certain doors to stay locked. And I did not know that one of those doors had a child behind it. Wedding planning did not begin with romance. It began with spreadsheets. I had one for guest names, one for vendor deposits, one for deadlines, and one for the small things people forget until the week of the wedding, like tips for the florist and whether the chapel allowed real candles. Daniel teased me for it at first. You make love look very organized, he said one evening, leaning against my kitchen counter while I compared catering invoices. It's not love, I said, it's logistics. He smiled and kissed the top of my head. That was how he did it. He made the correction feel affectionate, soft enough that I did not notice how often he was steering me away from certain things. The guest list was the first place it showed. I asked about Claire's family because it seemed respectful, not because I wanted to invite them without asking. I just thought there might be someone who should know Daniel was getting married again. He was rinsing a mug in the sink when I said it. His shoulders tightened before he answered. We're not close. Not close like Christmas cards only, or not close like no contact. He turned off the water. Evelyn. Just my name, quiet, wounded. I closed the laptop halfway. I'm not trying to push. I know, he said, but his voice had changed. It's just not something I want dragged into this. Dragged. The word stayed with me. A few days later, Marissa came over to help with the seating chart, although I had not asked her to. She arrived with a leather folder, a silver pen, and a calm smile that made refusal feel impolite. "I thought I could save you some trouble," she said. Daniel looked relieved when she said it. I remember that more clearly than I remember being annoyed. She sat at my dining table and began moving names around as if she already knew where everyone belonged. Richard at the front, of course. Marissa beside him, of course. Daniel's business contacts close enough to be seen in photographs. My co-workers were placed farther back until I moved them forward again. Marissa glanced at my pencil mark. "That's sweet," she said. "You're very loyal." It sounded kind until I heard the smallness in it. "They're my friends," I said. "Of course." She smiled and wrote something in her folder. I did not ask what. That became the pattern. Small decisions that were not small to me got softened, corrected, or delayed. The flowers were too simple. The music was too personal. My idea of having my mother's favorite hymn played before the ceremony was met with a long silence. Daniel rubbed his forehead. "I just don't want the day to feel heavy." It was my mother's favorite song. "I know," he said, "but we've both lost people. Maybe the wedding should be about moving forward." Moving forward became another locked door. Claire was the biggest one. Whenever her name came up, Daniel became fragile in a way that made me careful. If I asked whether he still had her things, he said some. If I asked whether keeping her photograph in the hallway was hard, he said sometimes. If I asked what happened to her family, he said, "They made choices." That was all. They made choices. As if a whole family could be folded into 3 words and put away. One Saturday in March, Daniel borrowed my car because his was at the shop, and I drove his to the pharmacy before a late shift. His car was cleaner than mine. No coffee cups, no loose receipts, a packet of mints in the console, registration tucked in a plastic sleeve. At a red light, my phone slid off the passenger seat. When I reached down for it, my fingers brushed something under the edge of the floor mat. It was a small plastic horse. Pink body, purple mane, one scratched eye. I held it in my palm for a second while traffic moved around me. When I asked Daniel about it later, he barely looked at it. "Oh," he said, "that must be my cousin's kid." "What cousin?" He opened the fridge and took out a bottle of water. "Second cousin, I don't know, someone from my dad's side." It was reasonable enough. Families had children. Cars carried strange things. I had once found a patient's grandson's toy truck in my work bag 2 weeks after a home visit. Still, Daniel took the little horse from me and put it in his coat pocket. Not on the counter. Not in a drawer. His pocket. I noticed that. I also noticed the door upstairs. Daniel's house had 3 bedrooms. His room a guest room and one room at the end of the hall that stayed closed. Not locked at first, just closed. When we started talking about where I would keep some of my things after the wedding, I asked about it. "That one's not usable," he said. "Storage. Claire's things." I stopped with a stack of folded towels in my hands. "Those." He looked pained immediately, and I felt guilty for making him explain. "I haven't been able to go through it," he said. "That's okay. It's not that I don't want a life with you. I know." He stepped closer. "Do you?" I set the towels on the hallway chair. "Yes." But that night, when I came back from brushing my teeth, I saw him standing outside that closed door with his hand on the knob. He did not open it. He just stood there. Then he turned and saw me. For 1 second, his face did not look sad. It looked alert. Then it softened. "You scared me," he said. "Sorry." He smiled tiredly and touched my arm as he passed. "You're too quiet sometimes." That bothered me more than it should have. By April, Richard had begun calling me about wedding details directly. Not often, just enough to make it clear that the Mercers had a way of entering a room before they were invited. He wanted to know if the photographer had experience with formal family arrangements. He wanted to know whether the guest book would be visible near the chapel entrance. He wanted the reception speeches reviewed ahead of time. Reviewed, I asked. Only for timing, he said. Daniel told me not to take it personally. He likes control. I noticed. He means well. I had heard that before about Marissa. People who mean well can still take up too much space. The strangest moment came 2 weeks before the wedding, when Daniel took a call during dinner at his house. We were eating pasta from shallow bowls at the kitchen island. My shift had run long, and I still had my badge clipped to my sweater. His phone buzzed. He looked at the screen and went still. I need to take this, he said. He stepped into the hallway, but not far enough. I heard only pieces. No, not today. A pause. I said after. Another pause, sharper this time. Keep her away until after. My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. When he came back, his expression was already arranged. Work, I asked. Something with my father. I nodded once. I did not ask more. Not because I believed him. Because by then I had started doing something I did at work, when a family story did not match the chart. I stopped arguing with the room. I started remembering details. A pink plastic horse, a closed door, Marissa's folder, Richard's clean start, Claire's family making choices, Daniel's voice in the hallway saying keep her away until after. After what? The wedding, I thought. Then I corrected myself. No, I hoped. The next morning, Marissa emailed me an updated seating chart. She had moved herself even closer to Daniel's father and placed an empty chair between 2 elderly relatives in the second row. No names. Just a blank space. I stared at it for a long time before I closed the laptop. The apartment was quiet. My mother's pearl hairpin sat in its dish by the photograph, catching a thin strip of morning light. I told myself every family had things they did not talk about. But I was beginning to understand that silence was not always grief. Sometimes silence was a place where someone had been hidden. The blank chair stayed with me longer than it should have. I did not mention it to Daniel that morning. I went to work instead. I packed my lunch, clipped my badge to my scrub top, and drove to the hospice unit while the sky was still the color of dishwater. That was how I handled unease then. I kept moving. Hospice work does not leave much room for spiraling. Someone always needs medication counted. Someone's daughter always needs a chair. Someone's son needs to be told, gently, that refusing morphine will not bring his father back to consciousness. The ordinary tasks keep you from floating away. That week, I was sorting discharge packets at the nurse's station when I saw a name on an old intake note that made my hand slow. Vales. Joseph Vale. He had been one of my patients almost 4 months before the wedding. Retired attorney, 81 years old, pancreatic cancer, widower, no children listed on his emergency contact form, only a niece whose name had been crossed out and replaced with a court-appointed liaison. I remembered him because he was precise even while dying. He wanted his water without ice. He wanted the blinds half open, not fully open. He corrected the spelling of a social worker's name on a consent form with a hand so thin the pen looked heavy in it. And he watched people. Not in a suspicious way, more like he had spent his whole life noticing what people hoped paperwork would hide. The day he gave me the envelope, rain had been tapping against the window in his room. I was checking his medication log, making sure the night nurse had signed the controlled substance count correctly. Joseph was awake, sitting propped against 2 pillows, his reading glasses low on his nose. Evelyn, he said. I looked up. Do you need something? Your full name is Evelyn Hart. Yes. Do you consider yourself reliable? It was such a strange question that I almost smiled. I try to be. He studied me for a few seconds. Then he reached toward the drawer beside his bed. I helped him open it. Inside were tissues, a rosary, a half-empty tin of peppermints, and a sealed manila envelope with my name written across the front in careful block letters. That unsettled me. When did you write that? Yesterday, he said, when my hand was better. I did not take it right away. Mr. Vale, if this is legal paperwork, I can call the social worker. No, he said, not yet. His voice was weak, but there was nothing confused about it. He told me the envelope was to be delivered to a family court advocate named Nora Whitcomb. Her address was written inside a smaller note taped to the back. He said there were copies in the envelope, not originals, copies. Copies of what? He closed his eyes for a moment, like even choosing words cost him. Enough to keep a little girl from being folded into adult convenience. I remember the exact phrase, because it did not sound like something a dying man would say casually. A little girl. Adult convenience. I asked if the child was in immediate danger. He opened his eyes. Not the kind people recognize quickly. That answer bothered me more than a yes would have. I told him I could not be part of anything improper. He seemed almost pleased by that. Good, he said, then don't be, just mail it when I'm gone unless Nora contacts you first. Why me? Because you read forms before asking people to sign them. That was all he said. He died 3 days later, just before sunrise, while the hallway smelled of burnt coffee from the staff lounge. I stayed through the pronouncement. I signed the nursing notes. I helped inventory his belongings with another nurse and watched the funeral home take him away under clean white sheet. The envelope went into my work tote, then into my apartment, then into the bottom drawer of my desk, beneath warranty papers, old lease copies, and my mother's death certificate. I told myself I would mail it. Then Daniel proposed. Then there were deposits and guest lists and fittings and double shifts. I did not forget exactly. I postponed it in the quiet, ordinary way people postpone tasks that feel heavier than they understand. Until Marissa's name started appearing everywhere. Marissa Vale. Vale like Joseph. I searched my memory for whether she had ever mentioned an uncle. She had not. Daniel had never connected them either. Maybe it was coincidence. I told myself that because coincidence is easier to live with than pattern. Still, the night after the blank chair appeared on the seating chart, I opened my desk drawer. The envelope was still there. Cream-colored, sealed, my name in Joseph's careful handwriting. I did not open it. I ran my thumb along the edge, feeling the stiffness of paper inside. Several sheets, maybe more than several. On the back, just like he'd said, was a folded note taped down with clear tape. Nora Whitcomb, family court advocate. There was an office address, a phone number, and beneath it in smaller writing one phrase. If they move before the wedding, call. I sat very still. Before the wedding. My apartment hummed around me. Refrigerator, traffic outside, a neighbor's television through the wall, normal sounds, normal life. I put the envelope into the inner pocket of my bridal tote 2 days later, telling myself I would mail it before Daniel and I left for the honeymoon. It felt responsible. Delayed, but responsible. I still did not understand that I had already been carrying the missing piece of someone else's life. The memory of Joseph came back to me in the chapel because of Lily's hand in mine. Small, cold, trembling. After she said her name, after Daniel went pale, after Marissa stood too quickly, I was still kneeling in my wedding dress with the veil pulling slightly at my hair. Lily stared at the pearl hairpin. Her crying had quieted into small broken breaths. You have a shiny pin, she whispered. I touched it without thinking. My mother gave it to me. Lily's eyes filled again. But differently this time, not panic, recognition. My real mommy had won, she said, in her blue box. Behind me, someone shifted. It was a tiny sound. Fabric against wood, a breath caught too late. I looked up. Marissa was staring at Lily. Not with confusion. With warning. Lily leaned closer to me, her voice barely there. Mommy Claire said the blue box was for remembering, but Marissa said it was trash. For a second the chapel seemed to tilt. Claire. Blue box. Veiled. A little girl folded into adult convenience. The pearl hairpin pressed against my scalp like my mother's hand. Daniel saw my eyes move toward the bridal room, where my tote sat on a chair beside my bouquet. His face changed. Just slightly. But enough. And that was when I understood the blue box was not just a memory. It was something they had wanted gone. Daniel moved first. Not toward Lily. Toward me. He crossed the aisle with that careful expression I had seen so many times before, the one that made concern look like tenderness and control look like restraint. "Evelyn," he said softly, "can we step into the side room for a second?" Lily's hand tightened around mine. I did not move. The chapel was watching us now, not loudly. No one stood, no one gasped, but I could feel bodies turned in the pews, flowers rustling against sleeves, the organist's hands resting still above the keys. I kept my voice low. "Is Lily your daughter?" Daniel blinked. A small delay. Too small for anyone else to notice, maybe. But I noticed it. "She's overwhelmed," he said. That was not an answer. I looked down at Lily. Her face was pressed close to my skirt now, her little white cardigan bunched beneath one fist. "Daniel," I said, "is she your daughter?" His jaw tightened. "This is not the place." Richard appeared beside him like he had been summoned by the word place. "Evelyn," he said, smooth and quiet, "families survive by keeping private things private." I looked at him. It was strange how calm I felt, not peaceful, not numb, calm in the way I became calm at work when a monitor alarmed or a family member started asking the wrong question in the wrong hallway. There would be time to feel later. Right then there was only the next correct thing. "She's a child," I said, "not a private thing." Richard's face did not change much, but his eyes cooled. Marissa came down the aisle then. Her heels made soft, measured sounds against the chapel floor. She had arranged her face again. Gentle concern, social grace, nothing sharp enough to accuse. "Lily, sweetheart," she said, bending slightly. "Come here, you've gotten yourself upset." Lily shook her head and pressed harder against me. Marissa smiled at the guests, as if apologizing for a spilled drink. "She does this when she's tired," she said. I watched Lily's reaction to that. Her shoulders rose, her breathing changed. She was not embarrassed. She was afraid. "Does what?" I asked. Marissa's eyes flicked to me. "Make stories bigger than they are." Daniel let out a breath. "Evelyn, please." There it was again. "Please." Not truth, not explanation, just pressure wrapped in pain. He lowered his voice. "After everything I've told you about Claire, can you just trust me for 10 minutes? 10 minutes. Enough time to walk down an aisle. Enough time to say vows. Enough time for a lie to become paperwork." I looked past him toward the bridal room. The door stood halfway open. Inside, my bouquet lay on the chair, white roses and pale greenery tied with ribbon. Beside it was my tote. Joseph Vale's envelope was inside. Daniel followed my glance. This time he could not hide the fear fast enough. Marissa saw it too. That told me almost as much as the envelope would. "I need my bags," I said. Daniel reached for my elbow, not hard, just enough to redirect. "Evelyn, don't." I looked at his hand until he removed it. No one spoke for a second. Then Lily whispered, "I'm sorry." That nearly broke me. Not Daniel's lie, not Marissa's face, not Richard's warning. A 6-year-old apologizing for being scared. I crouched again, careful of my dress. "You didn't do anything wrong," I told her. Marissa stepped closer. "This is confusing her more." "No," I said, "adults are confusing her." It was not loud, it did not need to be. I stood and took Lily with me, one slow step at a time toward the bridal room. My maid of honor, Anne, was standing near the doorway with her hand over her mouth. Anne had known me since nursing school. She knew when not to ask questions. "Stay with us," I said quietly. She nodded immediately. Daniel came after us, but Richard touched his arm. They exchanged a look so quick it felt practiced. In the bridal room, the air smelled like hairspray, roses, and the vanilla candle someone had lit on the windowsill. My veil brushed against the doorframe. Lily stayed pressed against my side. I opened my tote with steady hands. That was the part I remember most. My hands did not shake. There were tissues inside, lipstick, breath mints, my phone, folded vendor receipts, a copy of the ceremony timeline, and the cream-colored envelope with my name in Joseph's handwriting. Evelyn Hart. I pulled it out. Daniel made a sound behind me. Almost my name. Nora Whitcomb did not answer on the first ring. Or the second. For those few seconds, the whole room seemed to hold its breath with me. Daniel stepped closer. Evelyn, hang up. I looked at him. His voice was still low, but something in it had hardened. The softness was gone now. The wounded man had stepped aside, and what stood there was someone who needed me to obey quickly. The call clicked. A woman's voice came through, practical and alert. Nora Whitcomb. My name is Evelyn Hart, I said. Joseph Vale gave me an envelope. Silence. Then Nora said, where are you? At my wedding. I heard papers shift on her end. Is there a child present? I closed my eyes for half a second. Yes. Daniel reached for the phone, but Anne stepped between us. She did not touch him. She only stood there, small and pale in her bridesmaid dress, and somehow that was enough to make him stop. Nora's voice changed. Do not leave the child alone with anyone, do you understand me? I understand. Is the child Lily? Lily's fingers tightened around the back of my dress. I said yes. Marissa made a small sound at the door. Not grief. Not surprise. Annoyance. That sound answered a question I had not asked yet. Nora told me she was 10 minutes away and instructed me to keep the envelope with me. She said not to hand it to Daniel, Marissa, Richard, or anyone connected to the Mercer family. Her voice was calm. It helped. Calm has a way of giving shape to panic. When I ended the call, Daniel stared at me like I had become someone unfamiliar. We could have handled this privately, he said. You had time to do that before today. His mouth tightened. You're making assumptions from documents you don't understand. Then explain them. He looked toward Lily, then toward Anne, then toward Marissa. Not at me. Marissa came into the bridal room with one hand slightly extended toward Lily. Sweetheart, come with me, this is too much for you. Lily shook her head so hard one side of her ribbon slipped loose. Marissa's smile thinned. She gets overwhelmed. Children say things when they're overwhelmed. What did she say that wasn't true? I asked. Marissa's eyes flashed. Richard appeared behind her, filling the doorway with his dark suit and careful posture. Evelyn, he said, this does not need to become a public incident. It became public when a crying child had to find me at the chapel door. She was not supposed to be here. The words left his mouth cleanly. Too cleanly. I watched Daniel flinch. There it was. Not confusion, not concern. Logistics. I asked Daniel one more time, is Lily your daughter? He dragged a hand over his mouth. Biologically, yes. Biologically. Like fatherhood was a technicality. Lily heard it, I felt her shift behind me. Something in me went very still. And Marissa, I asked. Daniel looked exhausted now, but not the old kind of exhausted I once trusted. This was the exhaustion of a man whose cover story had collapsed too early. She's helped raise her. Marissa lifted her chin. I have been the only stable woman in that child's life since Claire died. Lily whispered, you said not to call her Mommy Claire. The room went quiet. Marissa's face did not move, but colour rose along her neck. Daniel said quickly, that's enough. I looked at him, no, it is. The organ began playing faintly in the chapel. Someone must have thought the delay had gone too long and tried to fill it with music. The melody drifted through the wall, soft and wrong, like the wedding was still trying to happen without us. Daniel heard it too, his expression shifted. Opportunity. Evelyn, he said softer now. Listen to me, Nora can come, we can talk to her after, but right now there are guests out there, your friends, my family, people who love us. Do they know about Lily? He closed his eyes. Today is not the day. I almost laughed then, not because anything was funny, because after all those months of silence that was still his answer. Not today. After. Later. Trust me. Richard stepped in. Proceed with the ceremony. We will settle the confusion quietly afterward. Settle, I repeated. He looked at me like I had become difficult. That was when I understood why the marriage mattered. Not emotionally, not spiritually. Officially. A wife looked stable, a wedding looked wholesome, a hospice nurse bride in a chapel full of flowers made Daniel look rebuilt, safe, respectable, the kind of man a court or trustee might trust with a child's life and money. I was not just being lied to. I was being arranged. I picked up Joseph's envelope, my phone, and my bouquet. The bouquet felt absurd in my hand, white roses for a wedding that had already died. Lily stayed close as we walked back into the chapel. Every face turned toward us. The music stopped wrong mid-phrase. Daniel followed a few steps behind me. Marissa came after him. Richard moved fast enough to reach the front row before I did, as if his seat gave him authority. I stood at the front of the chapel, not where the bride stands, but close enough. My veil was crooked. I could feel it pulling at the pearl hairpin. My throat hurt. My hands were cold. Still, my voice came out clear. The wedding will not continue. A murmur passed through the guests. Daniel's face changed. Evelyn, he said sharply. I did not look at him. A child came here afraid, I said, and I will not step over her to become a wife. No one moved. Then Daniel did. He stepped toward me, red rising in his face now, all the color that had left him earlier coming back at once. Do you have any idea what you're doing? He asked. You're humiliating me in front of everyone. I looked at him then. That was what broke my heart last. Not that he had lied. That even standing beside his frightened daughter, he still thought the injury was his embarrassment. Marissa moved toward Lily again. Come here, sweetheart. Anne gently placed her hand on Lily's shoulder. No, I said. Marissa's eyes cut to me. I held up the envelope, not high, not dramatic, just enough for Daniel and Marissa to see Joseph Vale's handwriting. Nora Whitcomb is on her way, I said. Joseph Vale gave me this. Daniel stopped breathing for a moment. Marissa went pale in a way makeup could not hide. Richard looked at the envelope, then at Marissa, and for the first time all day he looked less controlled than old. Daniel's voice dropped. Who gave you that? I answered quietly. You heard me. Marissa's hand closed around the back of the pew. That was destroyed, she said. Only 3 words. But everyone near the front heard them. And Daniel looked at her like she had just said the wrong thing out loud. Part 6 done. That's almost a warning. You know Joseph Vale? I asked. Marissa stopped in the doorway. Her face changed before she could stop it. Richard said, this is inappropriate. That word made something settle in me. Inappropriate. Not false, not impossible, not what envelope. Just inappropriate. I turned the envelope over. The taped note was still there. Nora Whitcomb. Family court advocate. I did not open the envelope fully. I only loosened the flap enough to see the first page inside, because some part of me still wanted to remain careful, still wanted to handle truth properly. The top sheet was a copy, legal formatting, case number, names. My eyes found one before the rest. Claire Elise Mercer. Then another. Lillian Claire Mercer. Lily. The room narrowed. I heard Anne inhale beside me. Lily's fingers curled into the satin of my dress. Daniel said, you don't understand what you're looking at. I looked at him then. For the first time that day, I did not search his face for the man who had brought lemon cookies to the nurse's station. I did not look for grief. I did not look for tenderness. I looked for the truth. And he looked away. Marissa's voice came low from the doorway. You have no idea what you're interfering with. Maybe she meant to frighten me. but all I could think was that Joseph Vale had been right. There was a little girl being folded into adult convenience, and she was standing beside me in a white cardigan, holding on as if my wedding dress were the only safe thing in the room. I took my phone from the tote. I found the number on Nora Whitcomb's note. Then I moved Lily gently behind me and pressed call. Marissa tried to take the words back. I meant, she said quickly, Joseph was ill, he was confused near the end. But no one believed the sentence when she said it. Not even Daniel. The front of the chapel had gone completely still. I could hear a baby fussing somewhere near the back. I could hear the air conditioning click on. Ordinary sounds, still happening around a life that had cracked open. Nora Whitcomb arrived 9 minutes later. She came through the side entrance in a navy suit, carrying a leather work bag and the expression of someone who had walked into family disasters before. She did not rush. She did not raise her voice. She introduced herself to me first, then crouched slightly to Lily's height. "Hi Lily," she said. "I'm Nora, I knew your mommy Claire." Lily did not answer, but her grip on my dress loosened a little. That was the first time all day I saw her breathe like a child instead of prey. Nora asked for the envelope. I gave it to her. Daniel said, "Those are copies, they don't prove anything." Nora looked at him. "Copies can still be evidence, Mr. Mercer." His face changed at the way she said his name. She opened the envelope at the front pew, not ceremonially, just practically. Papers came out, copies, notes, a letter folded into thirds, a page with Claire's handwriting, small and slanted, filling the margins. Nora read enough to confirm what Joseph had tried to preserve. Claire had amended Lily's guardianship instructions before she died. She had named concerns about Daniel's judgment, Marissa's access to the household, and financial pressure around Lily's trust. Lily was never meant to remain under Daniel's unchecked financial control. There were provisions for independent oversight if Daniel remarried under false pretenses or used a spouse to support a claim of household stability. I remember that phrase. Household stability. It sounded clean. It did not sound like a crying child in a white cardigan. Nora also found the reference to the blue box. Claire had kept letters there, copies of legal notes, names of relatives who were supposed to be contacted if anything happened to her. Joseph had preserved what he could because he believed the original box had been removed after Claire's death. When Nora said that, Marissa's chin lifted. "You're making this sound criminal." Nora looked at her. "I'm making it sound documented." Daniel turned to me then. For 1 second, I saw the man from the hospital cafe. Or maybe I saw the face he used when he needed me to remember him that way. "Evelyn," he said, "please, you don't understand how complicated it was after Claire died. I was drowning." I said nothing. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I should have told you, I know that, but I was scared. I thought if you knew everything, you'd leave." That might have hurt me once. Now it only made Lily press closer to my side. "You hid your daughter," I said. His eyes flicked toward the guests. I was trying to protect her. "From whom?" He had no answer ready. "Marissa did." "From instability," she said. "From people using her. From strangers deciding what was best for a child they don't know." Nora slid one page back into the envelope. "Mrs. Vale, you are not listed as a guardian." Marissa's mouth closed. Richard moved then, slow and measured. He came toward me as if offering comfort, but his voice was business. "Evelyn, this has gotten beyond what anyone intended. There is no need to make permanent damage out of a mistake. I can arrange compensation for the wedding costs, your apartment lease, any inconvenience." Any inconvenience? That was what my almost marriage had become in his mouth. A receipt to be settled. I looked at the bouquet in my hand. The roses had started to bruise where my fingers held the stems too tightly. "No," I said. "Just that. No." Not because I had a better speech, not because I wanted to punish them, because there was nothing to negotiate. Nora made 2 calls from the chapel vestibule, one to her office, one to the emergency family contact listed in Claire's papers, an aunt named Rebecca, Claire's older sister, who had apparently been trying to reach Lily for months, and had been told through lawyers and returned letters that contact was not appropriate at this time. When Nora said Rebecca was on her way, Lily looked up. "Aunt Becca," she whispered. Marissa looked away. That was enough. The wedding ended without anyone announcing it again. People stood slowly. Some left through the back doors. Some lingered because people always linger near damage, unsure whether looking away is kindness or cowardice. Anne took Lily to sit in the bridal room with a juice box someone found in a cooler. Nora stayed with them. I remained in the chapel for a moment because my body had not learned yet that it was allowed to leave. Daniel came to me one last time. "I loved you," he said. "I wanted that to be true." Even then, some wounded part of me wanted one clean thing to survive. But love does not need a hidden child to stay hidden. Love does not ask a frightened girl to wait until after the vows. Love does not turn a woman's kindness into paperwork. So I said, "I think you needed me." His face folded, not dramatically, just enough to show he knew the difference. Before I left, I reached up and removed my veil. The pearl hairpin caught in one strand of hair. I worked it loose carefully. My hands were shaking by then, but only a little. Lily watched from the bridal room doorway. "Are you still going to be a bride?" she asked. I looked down at the dress, the lace, the flowers, the life I had almost entered. "No," I said gently. "Today I'm going to be myself." She nodded like that made sense to her. Maybe it did. Months passed before I could look at the wedding photos and had deleted from her camera, but not from her memory. Daniel and Marissa faced consequences, legal and social, though I did not follow every detail. Nora told me only what I needed to know. Lily went to live with Rebecca. The trust was placed under independent oversight. Claire's name stopped being something people whispered around and became, finally, a mother's name again. I did not become Lily's mother. That mattered to me. Children do not need every safe adult to become family. Sometimes they only need one person to open the door at the right moment and refuse to close it again. One afternoon in late autumn, an envelope arrived at my apartment. The handwriting was uneven and careful. Inside was a drawing. A blue box. A pearl pin. A chapel with both doors open. Underneath, in small pencil letters, Lily had written, "Thank you for hearing me when I was little." I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after that. The pearl hairpin was in its dish beside my mother's photograph, the same place it had been before I thought a wedding would make me safe. I placed Lily's drawing next to it. For a while I cried. Not loudly, not because I wanted Daniel back. I cried because I finally understood what my mother had meant. Remembering who you are is not always a feeling. Sometimes it is an action. Sometimes it is saying no with your whole life shaking. Sometimes it is refusing to step over a child just because everyone else has agreed to keep walking. I did not get the wedding I planned, but a little girl was not erased. And on the day I lost the life I thought I wanted, I kept the promise my mother had left in my hand. Finally, CONCLUDED.